Hello everyone, today we're talking about hyperbolas, section 9.3 in our book. Okay, so here are all of the general information that we're going to need in order to graph our hyperbolas. Again, we have horizontal hyperbolas, right? So where our x is our transverse axis, they call this the transverse axis, the one that kind of splits our hyperbolas. We're going to call that the transverse axis, similar to like the major axis of an ellipses. So we have horizontal and we have vertical, just like we had in both of the previous sections. Important things to note here. We know it's a hyperbola versus an ellipse when we have x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared. Also note that the a squared is always under the positive variable. So in hyperbolas, it doesn't matter which variable is bigger, or which denominator is bigger. It matters which one's with the positive variable. So that's how you know your a and your b. Also note that hyperbolas are going to have asymptotes. So that's how we're going to approximate the end behaviors of our hyperbolas. And the asymptotes are just the line y equals b over a x plus or minus b over a x if it's a horizontal, and it's y equals a over b plus or minus a over bx if it's a vertical. So you just have to make sure you distinguish between those: horizontal, b over a; vertical, a over b. And then also to find the foci, your c squared equation is going to have a plus. So it's c squared equals a squared plus b squared. So when the minus is in the equation, our foci equation has a plus, kind of like I've been alluding to the last couple days. Okay, so first let's find the vertices, foci, and asymptotes, and then sketch it. So just like before I can do anything, I have to make sure the right-hand side of my equation is 1. So I'll divide everything by 225. And I get y squared over 9 minus x squared over 25 equals 1. Okay, so from that equation, I can figure out my a, b, c, and go ahead and graph my equation. So a. Okay, so since my y squared is first, right? My y squared is the positive value. That means my generic equation is y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared. Remember, the a always goes under the positive variable. So that means a is equal to plus or minus 3, right? Because a squared is equal to 9. So that means my major vertices are, and since this is a vertical, it's going to be 0, 3, and 0, negative 3. Okay, so those are my major vertices. Next, the b value is square root of 25. And the b just kind of helps us draw our asymptotes. So kind of like the foci aren't really a part of the graph, the b helps us draw our asymptotes, and we'll see when we get to the graph how that happens. And so in this case, our b are going to be the coordinates 5, 0, and negative 5, 0. Okay, then I'm going to want to find my foci. So to find my foci, I know c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Remember, it's a plus now because we're talking about hyperbolas. So my c squared is equal to a squared was 9 plus 25. So c squared is equal to 34. So c is equal to radical 34. And radical 34 is approximately 5.83, just so we kind of get an idea of where to put our foci. Okay, and the last thing we need to do are find the equation for the asymptotes. So the asymptotes are y equals, and then since it's a vertical hyperbola, we're going to know that our asymptotes are y equals plus or minus a over b x. So, plus or minus a over b x, meaning our asymptotes are y equals plus or minus, and my a was 3 and my b was 5. Right? A squared was 9, b squared is 25. So we get this equation, y equals plus or minus 3/5 x. So basically it's just a line. So now we have all the information we need to go ahead and graph this hyperbola. So let's start with our vertices at positive and negative 3. Our b value, like I said, they're not really a part of the graph. They just kind of give us guides for how we're going to draw our asymptotes. Our foci are at about 5.8. So these are my foci. Actually, I'm going to call them negative C and C. And I'm going to call this A and negative A. And I'm going to call this B and negative B. Okay, so if we go ahead and continue, we can see that we want to sketch our asymptotes. Y equals plus or minus 3/5 x. So remember, if we think back to slope, that means I go up 3 over 5. So I'm going to draw, why don't I draw my asymptotes in orange? So we're always going to start at the origin, up 3 over 5. That's kind of what the B does. It gives us kind of a reference point for our asymptotes. And then up 3 over 5 again. And then over 5 down 3. And over 5 down 3. So then up 3 to the left 5. That's where the negative 5 comes in. Up 3 to the left 5. And 5 down 3, 5 down 3. So when I go ahead and draw my asymptotes, something like that. Okay, something like that, and then they go this way as well. Okay, so now I can real easy draw my hyperbola. My hyperbola is going to go through the vertex. That's why the vertices are so important. So they're going to go through my A and my minus A, and then they're just going to approach my asymptotes as I go out. So the top one looks like this, and the bottom one looks like that. So our actual graph, the hyperbola, is in pink, and you can see that the B's were important to kind of gauge our asymptotes, and the foci tell us basically what direction our hyperbolas are facing. Again, the foci are there because that's what the computers need in order to draw the hyperbola. But we do need to include them, so make sure you include all your asymptotes and all of your critical points when graphing. Next, I need to find the equation of the hyperbola whose graph is shown. Okay, so this is obviously a vertical hyperbola. So we know that we're going to get y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared equals 1. Okay, so what do I know on the graph? Well, I know my foci are at plus or minus 13, so I know that c equals 13. I know that my vertices, right, where I'm crossing my y-axis, are at plus or minus 12. So I know my a is 12. So I know what a squared is going to be. I know a squared is going to be 144. But in order to find b, I'm just going to have to use the foci equation. So I know that, I'll just do it over here, c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. Okay, so c squared is going to be 13 squared. A squared is 12 squared and plus b squared. So I get 169 equals 144 plus b squared. So b squared is equal to 25. So now we know what b squared is equal to. I can go ahead and write my actual equation for this graph. I know it's going to be y squared over my a, because it goes through my vertice, My vertex was 12, so that's 144, because a squared is what I'm looking for. I'm not just looking for a. Minus x squared over b squared. Okay, my b I found to be, b squared I found to be 25, and that's equal to 1. So that's the equation of the given graph. And finally, let's say we have these conditions. Vertices at 0 plus or minus 6. Asymptotes are y equals plus or minus 1/3 x. So again, since our vertices are on the y-axis, I know this is going to be a vertical. So I know my generic equation is y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared equals 1. And let's see what we know. Okay, so we know my a is 6, and we know that y equals plus or minus a over bx. Right, so a over bx for my vertical. Right, we know vertical a over bx. Make sure you realize if it's a horizontal, you do b over a. Okay, but a over bx. Plug in what we know. Well, I know that my a is 6, and I don't know my b, but I do know 6 over b has to equal 1/3, right? Because they're telling me my asymptotes are this. So if I plug in for my a, what value for b reduces this down to 1/3? Well, my b must be 18, right? If I had 6 over 18, that would reduce down to 1/3. So they've just given you the simplified answer for your asymptotes. You basically have to work backwards to find out what the b was before they simplified it. So not too difficult. And then plug in what we know. We know that a equals 6, so a squared is 36. And I can't do 18 squared off the top of my head, so the equation we come up with is that equation. So we basically just took everything we knew. We knew our a, we know the general equation for our asymptotes, and we work backwards to find our b value, which is important because our equations has to have a squared and b squared in them. So go ahead and try the examples on the PowerPoint. The answers are again at the end of the PowerPoint, so make sure you're checking your work with the answers, and we'll talk about it in class tomorrow.